Okay, is that better? Hopefully people can hear us. If I can get a thumbs up or a yellow wave or something, just to test that people can now hear me. Yes, okay, excellent. Thank you, Neil. Okay, as I was saying, the reboot has failed and we haven't got cameras in the room. So we will have to carry on in sound only in the chamber, and but we can see those people who are online. So thank you for your forbearance. We got as far as declarations of interest, and at this point, I'm going to turn to Councillor Barry.
Yeah. Well, there we are. Lovely. Yeah, I'll be bringing the quarterly 3 corporate risks update, and an element of that covers home to school transport. So if there's any discussion on that, I'll just leave the room because my taxi can.
Thank you, Councillor Barry. We'll move on to item 3 of the agenda. Oh, it's probably worth just saying here, there is an open session, and at the end of the meeting, yeah. Yep. Okay, we'll pause just a second. Okay, in that case, I'll continue. Item 3 of the agenda in the open session is the minutes of the previous meeting, which was held in January. They are there for information. Has anyone got any issues they wish to raise? I won't go through page by page. If anyone's got any issues, please wave either in the room or virtually. Yes, Councillor Scrivens.
My mic to come on. Was it on? Is it? I got to remember the colours now. Yeah, I really appreciate the work that we've done to get this the minutes in place and that we've got it for this committee, because I know others haven't. But I'm just still a bit concerned. I've tried to read through the actions and the questions, but it's not very clear on what responses are to any of the questions we're raising. There's a lot in here about what's being asked, but there's very little unless there's something's resolved about what's being said in return. So I don't know if we can make sure we're doing that when we get in minutes back. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Scrivens. I think that's a wider issue than this committee. Actually, I think I know there've been concerns raised in the past. The minutes have been, there's a particular style, a particular company policy, so to speak, and I don't think it's above the pay grade of me in this committee to deal with that. But I'd be grateful if we were taken away to look at, so that people who look at the minutes in isolation actually have a clear understanding of what they say. Councillor Salmon.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's being looked at a later date in full council when the constitution comes back.
Thank you, that's really helpful. And I had my concerns as well, because the minutes as they stand are not hugely helpful in terms of finding out what the answers were to genuine questions that have been raised. So thank you for that, Councillor Scrivens. I share your views on that. Any other issues on the minutes? Okay, we'll now move on to item 4, which is a new development and a very welcome development, which is the Audit Committee's action log, and a really helpful way to keep track of the things we've raised in the past and to flag where things are. Look across the room. Lisa, you're going to talk us through them? Oh, Mark. Okay, Mark.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Very briefly, the action log, virtually all items are green. So if I just flag up the items that are still outstanding, first one is number 8. That will turn green because it's an agenda item on today's agenda. So hopefully when we go through that, that will turn to green. We'll update that for the next meeting. Item number 10, this will be addressed when the head of policy returns to work. He's not in work at the moment, so that'll be picked up then. And I think the last item was number 16. That will be addressed when the new forward work programme for the next municipal year is brought forward from May on. So that was it, Chair. But I think it's good progress that everything else is green and on track. Oh, there's one last item, number 19, which is also will be addressed at the next meeting in April. That's the items.
Thank you, Mark. My comments related to that item 18 was the suggestion, I think, came from Councillor Salmon, that I should attend the temporary housing meeting to talk about homelessness. And that meeting didn't happen, I'm led to believe, and that's why we've included an invite for a housing officer to come back to this meeting and the next meeting just to have a open conversation with that. You'll see it features on our risk register further on as well. So that's the only other point I'd make. In terms of the ones which are marked green, effectively they will fall off this action log as done, and they won't appear again, and the others will roll forward. So is everyone happy with the action log as a document to keep track of where we are? Excellent, thank you very much. We will now move on to item 5 on the agenda, which is the quarterly update on risk registers. Matthew Rivers isn't with us today, he's on leave, so I look across the desk to Councillor Barry.
Thank you, Chair. As you identified, Matthew Rivers is off today. He's on annual leave. Andrew Mogford would normally take this in his absence, still on sick leave. So I'll take you through the report. For continued economic turmoil and pressures from pay awards, energy costs, new demands on services, the continued inflationary pressures and consequential interest rate rises, all of the associated pressures from homelessness, school budget pressures, operational efficiencies required, all have impacted and continue to translate as risks to this authority. I thought, Chair, we'd start just by looking at the risks as laid out in Appendix 1 on page 22 and associated scores, the impact against the likelihood, times the likelihood. At the end of the third quarter, so January 2023, finance, two elements of it. Finance 1, balancing the budget, stands at a score of 20. Finance 2, the overall financial sustainability, is a score of 20. Cyber attacks, more on which you'll hear from later on, stands at 20. School attainment is at 16. Capacity in two parts. Capacity 1, having the skills and capacity for service delivery, has a score of 16. Capacity 2, which covers difficulties in recruitment and single points of dependency, both have scores of 16. Governance has a score of 12. Safeguarding is at 15. Performance 16. Homelessness increases to 25. It's climate change net zero, along with waste management target, WICIS and town centre safety all stand at a score of 16. In this report, we consider the developments of those factors over quarter 3, looking forward to quarter 4. Corporate management team considered these risks on the 16th of January and Cabinet considered the same on the 15th of February. We now have the opportunity to have the opinion of yourselves here at Governance and Audit on the same. At the end of quarter 2, we saw the finance risk increase as you'd expect with Finance 1, the threat to our ability to balance the budget, increase from a score 10 to 20, and Finance 2, the overall financial sustainability of the authority, increased from a score of 15 to 20. Two scores falling, school attainment from 25 to 16 and performance 20 to 12, highlighted at table 4.1 on page 18 of your report. You'll see displayed within the table at 5.1 on the next page of your papers, a table taking us through to the end of quarter 3, indicating not unexpectedly increases in 4 areas: capacity 1 and capacity 2, performance and homelessness. We'll consider capacity further in our next report. Capacity 1 in relation to losing the skills and ability to deliver on our key outcomes as an increase to 16. Capacity 2, the effect on recruiting and retaining staff, leading to single points of dependency, with the same increase 12 to 16. Performance in the threat of regulatory formal recommendations has increased likewise from 12 to 16. Homelessness, our ability to meet our statutory obligations has now increased from 20 to 25 because of the now imminent risk of us not being able to meet our relatively new legislative requirement to home everyone under this policy. With your note is we have introduced a target risk score and has been assigned to each risk incorporated into the strategy policy at full council on the 7th of September. We're also looking to introduce a summary of each risk to include the owner of the risk who has the responsibility, the risk score obviously indicating the level of risk trend, in which direction the risk is going. Is it an improving picture? progress on the risk on each of the mitigating actions. In addition, after a review of the learning operational risk register, 2 additional risks have now been identified and escalated. Sustainable communities and home to school transport, both of which are described at 5.6, page 20, with more detail, description and allocated score appendix 2, page 23 of your papers. And at that point, Chair, I'll leave it open to questions and debate, if that's okay.
Thank you, Councillor Barry. That's really helpful to understand. You headed off quite a few of my questions in the past in terms of how you develop this. The only one I think I would say is in terms of understanding roles and responsibilities. The Governance and Audit Committee is here to ensure that there is a risk management process in place, and I think you've amply demonstrated that. The actual individual review of individual risks is spread across the various scrutiny committees. And I wondered, when you talk about adding a column on to some of these things or targets, etc., you might think about adding a column on which describes which scrutiny committee each of these risks sits under. So we understand that things aren't falling through the gaps, that there is clear line of sight both for scrutiny to understand the management of each of these risks. Other than that, I was really happy with the process. Not happy with the number of reds and blacks, of course. It's evidence of the cost of living crisis and the funding crisis that we currently face. I'll just look around the room. Has anyone got any specific questions for Councillor Barry? Okay, in that case, we will move on to the next item, which is allied to it, which is the rolling program of corporate risk updates, and this one is about capacity. And I think Andrew, you've already touched on some of this.
Difficulties in recruiting and single points of dependency. Both score 16 at the end of quarter 3. Currently, the risk score for both stands at 16, derived from the impact score and the likelihood of that risk. The historical scoring of capacity as a risk is at section 4, page 26. More specifically, the mitigation for the current risks in relation to capacity 1 and 2 are highlighted at 5.1. Capacity, existing controls, restructures, redesign of work projects, succession planning, a gateway to applying for leaving the authority through voluntary early retirement and voluntary redundancy, redundancy training for redevelopment, robust business cases by managers for voluntary early retirement and voluntary redundancy, with actions being workforce and operational plans and strategies with chief officers and heads of service, apprenticeships, council dashboard monitoring as well. Capacity 2 existing controls to be established as capacity 2 develops, with the actions utilising the recovery transformation improvement plan to monitor and deliver the required recruitment, using the authority's capacity exercises, manage induction program, the apprenticeship scheme, and we have with us the chief exec and the 151 officer to answer any of the corporate issues that may arise from this. Along, and Hannah, was Hannah with us today? Oh, there we go. And for any specific HR issues. At that point, Chair, I'll hand it back.
Thank you, Andrew. I think the capacity issue is a really important issue for the organisation. It's a real tough ask to square the circle around seeking to recruit and retain against the backdrop of a struggling financial position with the cost of living and inflationary awards eroding council spending power at every turn. I wonder, Ellis, whether there's any general comments you want to make about how we actually ever square that circle, because yeah. Otherwise, this risk will sit here forever, I guess. And just technically, I guess there's a difference between a risk, which is something that might happen, and an issue which is here and now. And I get a feeling this is actually a here and now, isn't it?
Yeah, thank you for that hospital path, Chair. From a Merthyr perspective, I suppose we've had challenges in the past. So this is it's becoming tried and tested now, where we have to respond to such a financial challenge that we've had. However, this time round, it's a significant challenge to the local authorities. It's one of the most difficult positions we've had to close this budget. And obviously there is a knock on to our service provision and capacity within the organisation. On the flip side of that, everything we're doing to try and respond to making sure that we've got an appropriate workforce pipeline, that we do have adequate recruitment and retention, and that was born out of the work through the pandemic in the RTI plan. And we've worked quite hard on that, trying to make sure that we've got plans in place to make sure that we do attract good staff. So as people leave, which obviously there is an attrition rate in any authority, and I don't think, whilst we have had staff move on through what's been known as a great churn at the minute through COVID, I think, where everyone, through the advent of agile working now, lots of people have, those that wish to move, they've decided the travel barrier is no longer a barrier, and they can still live in Merthyr perhaps and work elsewhere. So we have experienced that equally, sort of, as have lots of other authorities, and for the staff we've lost, we've also gained staff back in. So if I just cite some of the work that's going on, so for example, we've got some exemplars really in our social care workforce initiatives such as a passion for practice that actually have done a great job in terms of attracting workforce into the organisation, and is seen as best practice actually. And so responding to the challenges we've got in terms of capacity, we're doing everything we can on that aspect. But obviously the financial challenge is a financial challenge, and we've still got to go through service readjustment and transformation to be able to respond to that, which is not going to be a 5-minute thing. It's going to be the short to medium term, possibly long term, in terms of readjusting our services as we go. So I don't mean to waffle on, but there's two sides of that coin, and how we square that circle, I'm not sure. But the pressure, we have to respond to the pressure, and that's what we're trying to do at the moment. Yeah. And Merthyr is a great place to work. We do get lots of staff wanting to come and work and continue to work for Merthyr. So for everyone we lose, we do gain people back in.
Thanks, Ellis. I think that's really helpful. It's not something you can readily measure, I guess. In a perfect world, in last year's terms, what would our capacity be, our headcount be, what's it going to be this year? And sort of when you're talking about recruit, you're only talking about effectively replacing those who do disappear through the great churn, as you said.
I think in terms of our strategic response in terms of recruitment, obviously we are responding to natural churn, right? So that's there. But obviously the period that the authority is going through now, in terms of setting budget, we are potentially having to look at how we cut the cloth accordingly in terms of service provision. We've got obviously a round of expressed interest from our workforce that will potentially pay with business cases subject to council approval, and so where there's a transformation agenda now on our service provision that will be aligned with our workforce pipeline initiatives, basically. So sorry, I don't know if I'm answering your question there, but essentially we've got the two tracks, I suppose, where where we lose people through national wastage, we are able to, I think we are fairly solid in terms of bringing people back in through a new pipeline. However, we are potentially looking to have to cut the cloth accordingly in terms of service provision.
Can I just add to that?
Yeah, of course, Hannah. Yeah.
I mean, one of the things, obviously, the workforce attraction and retention changes, over time, as Ellis described. But what we've spent a lot of time trying to do is to understand our workforce better by trying to put some workforce plans in place and getting managers to focus on the sort of movement that potentially could happen within teams. So we've started that journey through the performance management process as well. So we encourage managers to have those discussions about whether staff want to stay in the role that they're currently in. Do they want to make sideways moves? Do they want to leave the organisation? Do they want promotion? So once we start to talk about our workforce, we can get a better picture so that managers can forward plan, do that succession, try to remove, any risks around single points of dependency. So there is work going on where we've piloted a workforce planning template where we're getting managers to spend more time looking at their workforce. Obviously, there's going to be situations that arise where people leave and we don't know about it. But sometimes you can look at the fact that it's quite normal and natural to have movement within teams. It's just how we manage that. So we've focused a lot of time on that, and we're going to be looking at doing workshops and sessions with more managers this year to help with that.
Thank you, Hannah. Alice, do you want to come back in?
Sorry, Chair, just to add as well. Obviously, I think it's actually picked up in the backwards looking self-assessment report, but obviously members will recall that the capacity exercise we did as part of the RTI plan, where we bolstered our shall we say creaking statutory functions to the tune of £1.5 million. Obviously, the work we've been doing in terms of shall we say looking at business cases and right sizing services have steered away from any statutory functions, and those that were bolstered previously have not been looked at this time. So, from a governance and audit committee, just to make that point really, obviously that where things were there were concerns in the past, we've taken account of those in looking to the future.
And the difficulty you have is that when the non-statutory stuff is eroded, all you're left with is statutory function, and you can't erode that within certain limits. That makes things very tough, as we see from the temporary housing discussion we had at our last meeting. Thank you, Hannah, Ellis. A couple of hands up. I think Councillor Gibbs was first, and then Councillor Scrivens.
Thank you, Chair. Excuse me. Following on from what Hannah's just said, a bit of clarification I'm after, please, because obviously we have an ageing workforce within Merthyr Tydfil, and a lot of the experiences in the higher end, shall we say. Are there succession plans in place as well with this management programme you've set in plans with the teams?
Yeah, so as part of the workforce plan template, there's a succession element within that. So we'll be getting managers to look at their teams to identify those risks around staff that may be aging towards retirement and how we can retain the skills and knowledge. So that's one part of the risks, where it's talking about skills and knowledge that we could use either through people willingly leaving or through, that sort of older element of staff. There are teams, I think as you look at the data over the last few years, we have been able to recruit other staff in through things like an apprenticeship programme, but it's just continuing on that journey. Obviously, that journey becomes more difficult when we're going through periods of time as we are with retirement, but that also brings a positive, doesn't it? That perhaps it does allow some people to leave the organisation, and as we move and develop, we can look at people's skills and development and look to ensure that we transfer knowledge to other members of staff as well.
Councillor Scriven.
You may have answered part of my question then, and I guess it kind of links into what Kevin was saying, but my question was going to be based around the progression framework for our apprentices then. Does that reflect what we currently offer to our staff, and what sort of things are we doing with our apprentices to make sure that they're not just coming in at lower grades, but they're able to actually move up within the organisation? Or do we have any good news stories, anything like that, or situations where that has happened? And I guess in terms of the apprenticeship offer that we've got, are there any departments where we're not offering apprenticeships, but there's an opportunity perhaps we could be looking at that?
Yeah, we've offered apprenticeships for a number of years, and we've had lots of success stories with regards to some departments. For example, highways, they developed their apprenticeship program, and they were able to train them, develop them. They all get to become qualified within the first 2 years, and then those staff have been able to be, retained and will take up roles. We took on 6 apprentices in 2021, so they'll be coming up to their 2-year period. We've had 3 of those 6 actually complete their apprenticeship qualification early, so we're working with managers now to try and secure positions for them within the organisation. Obviously, it is a challenge because when we take them on a 2-year contract, and we need to ensure that we work with them to hopefully retain them. We do make them aware that we can't guarantee that, but we'll do our utmost to ensure that we can continue that progression. This cohort of apprentices over the last 2 years have had extra development. So we've worked with them on a sort of mentoring program as well. So we meet with them every other month. We meet with the managers every other month to look at how they're progressing. We set them additional work and projects, and we've given them other training to support them that they might not get through their particular qualification. So we've tried to manage it this time round as much more of a cohort to keep them together, so that they get a better experience than just coming in and doing a particular role. So we'll be looking this year to see, I mean, there are the challenge with apprenticeships is obviously the programs, the qualifications are fully funded, but the salary requires either a vacant post or additional growth within people's budgets. We were lucky when we had the healthy organisation as part of the recovery transformation plan. We were able to secure some corporate funding 2 years ago to bring some of those in to help with our capacity exercise. And we are just going to continue to see if we can support that. Obviously, we do have that extra challenge at the moment.
Yeah, that's great.
Can I just come in on the back of that? I mean, that is our particular challenge being a small authority, to making sure that with the larger authorities, there's a churn rate, which there's a greater chance of apprentices, as they finish, going into the workforce. Our challenge, and we're discussing this at length at the moment, how do we make sure the last thing we want to do is have apprenticeships that then we lose, then they go elsewhere. So it's how do we, and that's, as Hannah said, we can't guarantee a space, but how do we do everything we can to make sure that we're taking people on in areas where we think we can match people into a permanent job at the end of it. But it is a real challenge, and that's predominantly down to our size.
Yeah, well, that's great. Thank you. And so, I understand what you say, and I think one of the biggest issues on apprenticeships has been particularly around social services areas for other local authorities, trying to work out how that arrangement would work. Because I guess that's one of the big ones where there's vacant spots for most areas where there's a lack of social workers. So just wondering, what opportunities we've got to look at areas like that, perhaps. I know other authorities in the same boat, though they struggle with the same thing, but I think there's quite a big demand for some areas, and a lot that people would want to do if we've got the offer there. But obviously, as you said, as a small authority, there is that difficulty in putting that in place. But yeah, no, thank you. And I'm glad to know that the apprentices are getting that diverse area of learning as well, and not just in the areas that they're actually doing the apprenticeship with. That's really good to hear. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Scriven. That's helpful and a good conversation. Recognising that this is an enormous area and the mitigation is not instant and will take a long time to deal with. Just a couple of brief comments on me in terms of how we sort of represent this as a risk. There's a sections in capacity 1 and capacity 2 about actions required to manage risk to an acceptable level. My obvious question: what's an acceptable level here? I mean, what we'd like it to be and what's realistic. I think there's 2 very different things, and so I think in terms of assessing the level of risk, that would be helpful. So I think Councillor Barry, you mentioned target levels. I think that would be helpful. And I think the other thing I'd say is that where we have those actions listed under each of those bullets on page 27 of the bundle, the bullets are quite short. We don't have a when. We don't even have a how. So again, it's kind of difficult to know whether these are very long-term actions or next time round we'll see risks changing because these have been dealt with. So that would be helpful to understand those as well, because I suspect some of this stuff is not short-term at all. So thanks for that. Any other questions for Councillor Barry or any of our, actually I was going to call you witnesses then, officers?
Sorry, I was just going to
Oh,
say,
yeah.
in terms of the sort of where we want to be in the next steps,
Yeah.
we do pick that up within the healthy organisation plan. I do believe that I'm bringing a report to one of the scrutiny meetings, I think in March, which is going to go into depth on the healthy organisation plan. So maybe we can provide a bit more clarity and detail around that then.
That'd be helpful, Hannah. If you could just share with me a link to that when it's published, that'd be really helpful. Thank you. Okay, well, thank you. That was a good conversation. That's so we now move on to item 7. This is, I think Alice described as a look back, and it's a very long look back as well. You have good eyes to see this far back, because this is the 21-22 corporate self-assessment document, noting we're literally weeks away from 23-24. I think I'm just trying to set the scene here in terms of we saw a draft of this in October and it's already been approved by council. So I'm kind of saying this is for information only, but Andrew, if you want to introduce it, and we'll see how much discussion it needs.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Okay, requirement of the Local Government Elections Act 21 replaces the requirement of the Council's annual performance report to incorporate the Wellbeing Future Generations Act 25 2015. The new document has been described as process orientated, focused on activity or outputs, which can be easily measured. The report covers those objectives that were met through, as you identified, Chair, 21-22. The report was presented to the Governance and Audit on the 24th of October and approved at full council on the 9th of November. So I'll hand you back at that point, Chair, to decide what you do.
So for me, the only check was in terms of next steps. It's a document which reviews our assessment, and as I suspect this work is currently underway, getting 22-23s done. Does this document get published? Is it going to be on our website? Is it on our website? Just understand the order of things.
I'll have to check. My understanding is it will get published, but I don't know if it's already, may already be there. But I will have to check and come back to you.
That's kind of what I was thinking, because it was approved by council. I
Yeah.
wouldn't have thought it would need today to.
As part of the act, obviously, Governance Audit Committee were one of the addressees that this had to be brought back to, along with Welsh Government ministers, and there's a fair list of it, and it may already be published, so I will check and let you know.
That's really helpful, just to understand it's there. And as I said, we're looking back here, and this is our second bite the cherry. So I mean, interested to see if anyone's got any questions, but since it's already been approved, I kind of limit, but I'll look to Councillor Gibbs.
Thank you, Chair. It's not about the actual report itself, it's more about, could you explain the process of why the report has come back to the Governance and Audit? Because, like I said, we've already, Governance and Audit have already gone through it. It's been approved by full council. So can you explain the process of why it needs to come back?
Yeah.
Just curious.
I can't say why. I can say, sorry, I don't know the logic as to why, but it's part of the Local Government Elections Act. It specifically states, and I looked to Mark Thomas to back me up on here, that it has to come back as part of the legislation.
After it's been signed
Yeah,
off and after we've seen it previously.
Yeah. As I said, I can't. That's yeah.
I just wanted to get you ready.
Logic as to why I can't tell.
Okay.
Mark.
Yeah, I think the logic is that in case Governance and Audit Committee made any recommendations for any changes or amendments, then to make sure they were reflected in the final document, or if not, that it's explained why. So that's the logic behind it, as I understand it. So that's why it should do a full loop. But that was one of the new responsibilities that came in with the Local Government Elections Act for Governance and Audit Committee, and it's linked to as well MP reviews and other things going forward. But that's the it's unusual. I can't think of any other example where this happens, but that's what Ellie said is correct.
No, that makes far more sense, Mark. Thank you very much.
And I'm sure that the timeline will be a little bit shorter next year as well.
But I'm thinking perhaps in the next one, it may be handy just to put a line in there. There were no recommendations or follows up from the previous audit committee.
Yeah, a very short cover paper saying why it's here and what we're supposed to be doing. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Really helpful. Okay, there's 100 and something pages here. Councillor Barry's been studying up on it all night. So have we got any questions for him before we progress? Okay, you got away with it. I've got a question on page 150. No, I haven't. So it's okay. We'll now move on to agenda item 8, which is the Audit Wales work programme and timeline, and we have two colleagues from Audit Wales online, Ian and Neil. It looks like Ian has sprung to the fore, so I'll hand it over to you, Ian.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So this is the work programme update for Q3 up to the end of December 2022. It covers the position for our financial audit work, our local performance audit work, local government studies, and EST and the CIW as well. It's essentially an item for information only, but I'm happy to take any questions on it, although depending on what project that relates to, I may have to take that away and liaise with the relevant audit team before coming back to you. But if there are any questions, I'm happy to take them. Thanks.
Thank you. I guess the obvious one for me is as a sort of a work program and timetable is given last year's difficulties around the accounts timetable, I wondered whether there was going to be some commentary on what's the likely timescale for this year end, given that we're now in February, recognizing that we had significant delays last year, whether those delays are going to roll forward this year or what to expect. I don't know whether Ian, you know that, or actually Steve, you might have an insight into that. But Ian, I'll hand over to you.
My colleague Neil is part of the financial audit team, so he might want to come in here.
Neil.
Yeah, thank you, Jay. I can give a bit of an update on that, although specific dates, I'm afraid I can't provide anything on that as it stands. As you rightly pointed out, there were significant delays last year. And I would anticipate that we are going to have delays again this year. We have challenges in terms of recruitment ourselves, but also we're operating under a new auditing standard this year, which is ISO 315, which is quite a significant change in the way we're required to work. If there's not already been so, there will be communication from our ELT to the council in terms of the more detail of the impact of how this will work. But yeah, that's all the sort of timeline I have at the minute. We are behind where we are with all of our audits at the minute as a result of those issues.
Okay, thanks. That's not hugely satisfactory in our audit committee, and indeed, I'm sure for Steve's team who's trying to schedule some work in terms of we had a terrible confluence this year where our final account slid all the way back into budget setting, and that was really awkward and inconvenient for all concerned. It sounds like there's no guarantees we won't have the same arrangement this year, so I'm hugely disappointed by that. I understand ISO 315 is coming along, and that's going to increase, change the skill mix, I think is the phrase that's used in some of the documentation. But I'm a little bit galled at Audit Wales looking to increase fees by somewhere in the region of up to 18%, and the service is still no longer meeting statutory deadlines. So I'm concerned about that, and an update as soon as you've got any information would be much appreciated. Thanks. A couple of questions for me in terms of specifics before I open it up to others. Page 4 has the section on assurance and risk assessment, and there's a long detail about the scope, and then the other two columns are very thin. The timetable is the entire year and the status is ongoing. I wonder if we can get a bit more meat on those bones.
Yeah, that's fine. So yeah, the assurance and risk assessment process essentially it is ongoing, and it rolls from year to year, and in general it's a high level look at various arrangements that are in place. We also have thematics as part of that, and in those we've got the capital program management, which that work's not started yet, but is likely to start in the next few months. We've got the use of performance information is another that'll have another separate output. The setting of wellbeing objectives, that's a project that we've been doing and we're continuing to do. It was paused at one point because of circumstances inside the council, but we are picking that up again. And then generally, a few weeks ago, we presented to senior management about the sort of high level audit risks for the coming year. Had a conversation that helps to inform the work programme. So there's not necessarily an output for every aspect of the assurance and risk assessment, but there are some defined outputs as part of it.
Okay, thank you, Ian. That's helpful. I think in terms of understanding, it'd be better if there were actual defined outputs listed in the status section or when we were going to get those. But
Okay, now we'll bear that in mind. Thanks. Yeah,
sometimes I feel it's an endless rolling program because you mentioned something that's going to happen in the next few months. That sounds like a 23-24 program rather than a 22-23 one. But okay, I kind of get that. Same kind of questions apply to the next page where we have to be confirmed as well, which and the digital review. I'm assuming we are 11 months into a 12-month year, and to be confirmed feels rather woolly. I don't know if you've got anything to add on that one.
Yeah, I've got a few more details on digital. We've got there's a core team who are going to roll that out across all 22 councils, Merthyr included, obviously. That the focus of that project is going to be on the council's digital strategy, and essentially to do with our audit duties about in developing that strategy, has the council acted in accordance with the sustainable development principle and put in place proper arrangements to secure value for money in the use of its resources. So there are two core performance audit duties, and so it's linked to the strategy, and that work is starting shortly.
Thank you. Any other questions for Ian? Should we move on to the next Audit Wales item? Okay, I don't see any hands, so we'll go on to item 9. So I think we stay with you, Ian, which is the Audit Wales summary report.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Chair. So yeah, this is our 2022 annual audit summary. There's no new messages in this that the council haven't seen before, but I'll take you briefly through it. So there's a key facts section at the start about the council and the county borough, and there's a section on the Auditor General's statutory duties. So there's a section on our financial audit work on the 21-22 accounts, which the Auditor General gave an unqualified opinion on. We then go through the local performance audit work covering our 21-22 work. So that includes the risk assessment review, the springing forward reviews on assets and workforce, and the Cumtaff Magannog Regional Partnership Board baseline governance review. There's then brief reference to the work of CIW and Estin since the last annual audit summary, and there's descriptions of national local government studies that have been carried out in this period. And the final section is what work we planned for 22-23. So outputs that will be finalised in due course are the capital programme management, the council's use of performance information. That's got a focus on service user feedback and outcomes. And I mentioned in the last item a project on the council setting of wellbeing objectives. So the work on the unscheduled care project is currently ongoing, and a piece of work, as I mentioned before, on the digital strategy is starting shortly. So that's a brief summary of what is in the annual audit summary, but happy to take any questions you may have. Thanks.
Thank you, Ian. Yeah, it's as you said, I don't think there's any new messages. I think we've seen a number of these reports scattered through the year, but it's helpful to see them all compiled into one place. Again, I kind of bristle a little when I read the 21-22 piece on the accounts again, and there's no mention of the issues and delays and the issues behind that stuff, and I think that's frustrating. And the other phrase I really get annoyed at is a number of changes. One is a number and so is a million, and I'd like some sort of better quantification with the small number, significant number. A number of changes leaves that hanging, and people are going to have to go back and look at the accounts to actually see what that was. Other than that, nothing else leaps out at me. With any other questions? And I guess what I do is put my officer colleagues on the spot a little, in terms of saying the intention of the majority of this work is to add value. And I just wondered whether the recommendations in these reports have been useful, have been taken up, have been embedded into the council's ways of working to make us a more efficient organisation. I wonder if anything leaps out at anybody they want to talk us through. Perhaps if not, that's the whole question around value for money work, but okay. Shall I pick on somebody, Alice?
That's fair. You're going for me this afternoon, isn't it? Yeah, so the discussion Ian referred to earlier when he came along to our corporate management team last week, I believe, we discussed the outline work programme. There's nothing that we didn't agree with the corporate management team in terms of picking up as priority areas. We know ourselves the things we need to look at. So we're in agreement from an audit perspective there. And it is always beneficial to have the mirror held up by audit colleagues, from that perspective. So, from my personal opinion, yes, it does add value. It is useful. In terms of the summary 2022, yeah, obviously the national studies, we try to learn from those and see what the best practice is from across Wales. How can we learn? From a Merthyr perspective, we're always happy to borrow with pride and learn where there's good practice. And I think some of our services offer some of that good practice. I mentioned our social care colleagues earlier. We are contributing into this arena as well. So yeah, from my perspective, I don't know if there's anything particular. Yeah, I mean, obviously there have been challenges. You mentioned yourself about the accounts and the delays, but Steve, is anything in particular you want to cite from your perspective?
The one thing I'd say is the accounts might have been delayed here, but they've been delayed even further in other places. Steve.
Yes, I think just for myself, I think what just might be useful is when we talk about the accounts for last year and we go through, etc., the ratio of the reserves to the net expenditure, so on. I think a comparison with just other authorities would be good there. If we had an average across Wales or just table in there somewhere, which shows exactly where we lie against every other authority. I think that would be useful, Chair.
Thank you, Steve. That's a helpful suggestion. Ian, if you can take that back to base, that'd be really helpful.
Yeah, thanks.
Obviously, any negotiation on the 18% increase, we're more than happy to have a chat about that as well.
Well, if this was a commercial sector, we had the choice to go somewhere else, we might be having a very different conversation. Okay, yeah, Councillor Barry.
Yeah, Neil, just on that point, really, Steve makes a great point in terms of the comparison of our reserves. I mean, we say we have 35.8% as an equivalent. How does that stand? Would you know how that stands? Because that piece of information is valuable to us only in comparison. So would you know at this juncture how that stands in relation to other authorities, and would you suggest that's a healthy position to be in?
Yeah,
we've got on our website we have a financial sustainability data tool that has comparators. It's not yet got the 21-22 data from this accounts, basically this round of accounts, but that my understanding is it will be added shortly, and that has a whole range of comparators. So, for example, it'll who's got the healthiest usable reserves as a percentage of net cost of services, and conversely, who's got the smallest margin there. So there is information and comparative information that we are looking to share sort of on an ongoing basis, that will hopefully add shed some light on the national picture. So that's the tool really we are continuing to sort of develop, and it's on our website.
So we'd have access to that, would we?
Yeah, I'm happy to share that. Happy to share that link around if that helps.
Well, thank you, Neil.
thank you, and that's really helpful. I guess
Yeah.
the delays in the 21-22 information being up there is simply because not all the accounts are yet signed off, I suppose.
Yeah, that's my understanding. I can try and find out when that'll be on there, but yes, that will be updated in due course. But I'll send the link round after this meeting if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you, Ian. Councillor Scriven, you've been very patient.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Just in regards to the planned work, obviously we've got that bottom bullet point down there about the ongoing progress against the recommendations from the 2021 report. It's not something I want the committee to kind of lose sight of. So I'm just wondering, is it worth us having something similar to an action log for that piece that's got sort of like a RAG status against those recommendations? Perhaps we can review it on a quarterly basis. It might even inform part of the forward work program if we're keeping an eye on where we are with those, because of course I can read in the report now, but from my memory, unless I go back through it, I wouldn't really know where we are on that unless it's something we got to bring back. So perhaps it's worth us looking at it being a more regular update on where we are with those recommendations.
That's a really, really good point. Obviously, internal audits come to us with a list of outstanding recommendations. Lots of other organisations make recommendations upon the council, and you know, Esting and others might well be included in there. But I think the Audit Wales recommendation is particularly relevant to this committee, and I think that's entirely reasonable. We should be able to collate the recommendations that have been made by Audit Wales and where are we in progressing them. Hold on, I'm looking across to Mark. Mark.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's actually on the agenda for I think it's on the agenda for the next meeting for April 24th. It's, let me check. I'm checking the forward work programme. Oh, hang on, I'm sure I saw it earlier.
April 23, hopefully, not April 24.
23 even. I'm sure I saw it.
24th of April.
Is it then?
Okay, well, if it's not, perhaps we'll make sure it is stuck onto the agenda for a meeting going forward, and we'll cover consideration of how regularly we need to get that update.
I'm sure I've seen it. Is there? It is.
Yeah.
I can't see where it is on the. Anyway, it is on there for yes, but it's the frequency then as well, isn't it? That's the point you made. It's all, you know, that's
Yeah.
once a year or whatever, but it's the frequency. So
Yeah, of course. As I say, we
Well,
don't want it to be something as regular as our own action log, because that's too consistent. But
Yeah.
even if it was every quarter, we can review that. And it might mean we need to work around the forward work program and bring something back in, just making sure we're keeping track of it as a committee.
That's really, really helpful, and we'll consider in April, and as part of that, we'll consider frequency. Okay, excellent. Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions for our Audit Wales colleagues? Okay, thank you. We will move on. In that case, we'll switch from external audit to internal audit, and the first of their bundle is the internal audit recommendations paper. And Lisa.
Thank you, Chair. So agenda item 10 is the report to members on internal audit recommendations made, implemented and outstanding. So recommendations are made at the conclusion of an audit review if it is felt that improvement should be made to mitigate risk and strengthen controls. So we include our recommendations in our final audit reports, and recipients are asked to provide management responses to indicate whether they agree with them and how they plan to implement them. And our recommendations are classed as either high, medium or low priority. We also have a process in place whereby once the target date for implementation has been reached, we contact the relevant officers and we ask them to provide us with feedback as to whether the recommendation has been implemented in accordance with the date that they have provided us with. And we have an internal audit software system called MK Insight, which helps us to keep track of internal audit recommendations. Now, the first recommendation monitoring report was brought to this committee on the 12th of October last year, and this provided details of all recommendations made by the RIA since the implementation of the new software in April 21. It was agreed at this meeting that going forward, the recommendation report would include anything that was outstanding from the previous year, together with all recommendations made in the current year. So the report and Appendix A summarises those internal audit recommendations on that basis for 21-22 and 22-23. So members will note from the appendix that there are 16 recommendations relating to audit assignments undertaken in 21-22, which have target dates in the future. And we've got one low priority recommendation, which has passed its implementation date, but we have received verbal confirmation that it's been implemented, but we await written confirmation before changing the status of that recommendation. In respect of the current financial year to date then, we've made 87 recommendations, and of these 71 have been fully implemented. We have 15 recommendations where there are target dates in the future. None of the recommendations have passed the implementation date and are outstanding, but we do have one that wasn't accepted by the service area, and we reported this back to the committee on the 16th of January 2023. And I believe also that we asked members last time to agree the format of the report, and everyone was happy with the format and the layout of the information which we present to this committee, compiled from our internal audit software system. So I'm happy to take any questions on the report or the recommendations.
Thank you, Lisa. For my part, I think it's an excellent layout of a report. It's very clear and very concise, and it also contains excellent news as well, in respect of audits recommendations are being addressed in a timely fashion. That there is only one outstanding for a previous year, which is a low level recommendation. He said informally you've been told that's been dealt with also. There's nothing outstanding which is beyond its due date for implementation, and that's really positive as well. I guess the other question I'd ask is, of the ones that aren't yet due for completion, has anyone said anything about this is going to be tough, I'm not going to meet this deadline, we need extensions, or have you had any such conversations like that at the moment? Mike?
Not at the moment.
Oh, yeah. Tom?
Not at the moment, Chair. We tend to have the conversation with the officer at the time of the report being finalised as to a reasonable time scale. So at the time of the final report being issued, we'd like to give some consideration to practical timescales and the risk of the recommendation. It's normally then down to managers to move forward with our recommendation. So unless they brought it to our attention, it would only be at the point that the target date has expired that our procedures kick in.
But that's really positive, because it means that managers are being honest about timescales. They're not sort of saying, oh, you're right, we'll fix that tomorrow, and then 2 years later they still haven't done it. They've been realistic in setting those timescales, and I think that's great, because we fully recognise that audits come on top of all the other pressures they've got to deal with as well. I mean, high recommendations need to be dealt with more quickly than the lower ones, and I think that's really positive. So I'm really pleased with this report. I know a number of organisations will be very, very happy to have something as good as this. So congratulations all concerned. Any questions for Lisa? No, excellent. We will progress therefore, and we will look at item 11, which is the forward work plan. We just hinted on this previously. Again, stay with you, Lisa.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So agenda item number 11 is the forward work programme, which we bring to each committee and ask members to approve. So the Appendix A shows the forward work programme for the year. And the purpose of the work programme is to assist committee in making sure that due consideration is given to all aspects of core functions, and it allows members to see the different timescales for the various reports that are presented. So the next Governance and Audit Committee is due to take place on the 24th of April, and Appendix A lists the proposed agenda items. So we have a corporate risk update from CMT members. We have the 6-monthly update on the annual governance statement, external audit recommendations, which we referred to previously. There's the Audit Wales certification of grants and returns for 2021-22, the Audit Wales audit plan 2023, the internal audit charter, internal audit information reports, the committee forward work programme, and we also have temporary housing solutions, an update from officers following the discussions at the last Governance and Audit Committee meeting.
Terrific. Thank you, Lisa. That's really helpful. The only thing to really be done is I'm sure I ask this question every single meeting, is make sure that the forward look programme matches against our terms of reference, that we cover off all the pieces of work we need to do, and make sure we are doing them. And the only thing I'd say is, obviously, then the dates need to roll forward into the 23-24 calendar. I believe those dates have been set. It is what it is. I use that awful phrase, but I think it's really helpful. We'll keep it under consideration as it roll forward. But thank you for the work, Lisa. With that, we will stay with internal audit, and we'll move to the 2 issued internal reports that have come out since the last meeting. One on purchase cards, which is a reasonable assurance opinion, and one on St. Tidville, and that's also a reasonable audit opinion. Lisa, do you want to quickly summarise?
Yes, okay, thank you, Chair. And so this report is just to inform members of the issued finalised internal audit report since the date of the last meeting. Copies of the reports have been provided to members, and members will note that there have been 2 internal audit reports finalised since the last committee. One of these is purchase cards. The other is Yscol Santa's Tydfil. We've made 5 recommendations for purchase cards and 11 for Yscol Santa's Tydfil. And members will note that for both of those audit reviews, we've given an audit opinion of reasonable assurance.
Thank you, Lisa. Members will have had the copies of the audit reports sent to them on modern.gov. A few little bits and pieces to look at without getting into any detail. The purchase card area talks about some expenditure which was not appropriate. In those areas, do we do mini training sessions to remind people what is appropriate? And if it isn't appropriate or not allowed, are we recovering any monies that have been spent improperly? Don't know whether to look at Lisa or Steve for that, actually.
It's not marked as exempt, but would they be exempt?
Well, I'm trying to discuss these in general terms, or get into any specific incidences and to say and where there is inappropriate activity. Yeah. I look for advice.
Yeah, they're not exempt reports as such, but it was a way of members being aware of reports that have been issued by internal audit, and there was an opportunity then for members to flag up if they wanted more information at the future at a future meeting. So I think Councillor Sam was probably correct in terms of not getting into the detail, but it was very much, you know, an opportunity for members to flag up any sort of thing they want to flag up for future meetings.
For the schools, Yscol Santa's Tydfil, to be honest, in case anything's embarrassing for them.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Councillor Gibbs.
Remind me or clarify when and where were these reports sent to? Because I don't appear to have them.
Modgov.
Where on what?
They're on the private section of modern.gov again, so they're not public.
It's an internal. It's governance and audit, internal audit.
Is that? Well, that's nice to know.
So if members have any specific issues, we can raise them either at the next meeting or indeed in between meetings. They don't have to be formally. I'm sure you can email our colleagues here and our audit colleagues. They can raise any issues. So my generic point was that about if without even getting into the internal audit report, if inappropriate spend is found, what there is a process of, I hate to sound a bit North Korean if I say re-education, but reminding people about sort of what the rules are and appropriate levels of recovery, I guess. Steve, I'm guessing that's probably you more than anybody else.
Yes, I think that is the case, Chair, that if it was identified that that was the case, then there just, you know, then there just would be a reminder sent into all staff, obviously. And if it's a case as part of the report, that it does then seem as if it's a bit wider than that, then obviously we just then would investigate wider. But for this report, I just haven't seen the report, I must admit that. So we've been otherwise engaged over the last number of months, so we haven't really had an opportunity to look, I suppose, at just some of the reports which have just come forward.
And just, it's probably worthwhile saying in response to Councillor Salmon's point that this report hasn't been seen by the public, and I don't want to get hairs running in terms of there is widespread illegal activity in the final. These are minor spends of the very, I guess in terms of trivial nature, I guess I would say, but Lisa.
I think it's important to add as well that sometimes on a school audit review, you might note inappropriate expenditure, for example, to a school private fund, but it might be more appropriate to come out of the budget. So it's not inappropriate for the school, it's just the means by which they funded the expenditure. So then it's just a case of funding it through a different method as opposed to it being completely inappropriate.
Yeah, okay, thank you. That's really helpful. And some of it is actually sort of the recommendations around policy reviews, where the policy doesn't seem to be in line with working practices. So it isn't that things have been done wrong, they just don't exactly fit the policy rules, and perhaps the policy rules need to be changed to fit. Okay. If anyone, when members have gone away and read these, there's any future issues, then I guess we can just have an email discussion of what we need to deal with. And if there are significant issues, they can come back to a future meeting. Lisa? Happy? Okay, thank you. Okay, that's the last substantive item of the open session. There's a couple of sessions here about reflection and evaluation. I think it's been difficult, shall we say, without cameras here. It's been awkward for all concerned to sort of manage this. And again, people have had the benefit not seeing me, so that can only be good, can't it? So again, you know, as always, we'll always try to do better next time. Under any other business, a few things of business to talk to. Today is the last formal meeting of our head of the Regional Internal Audit Service, Mark Thomas, before he goes off to, oh, he gone off to retirement, I guess. I guess. So, Mark, thanks on behalf of the committee for looking after us for the last year, and personally, when we first met somewhere around 30 years ago. That's terrifying, isn't it? So, thanks for your help and support throughout. And as they say, the king is dead, long live the king. The news is that a new head of the Regional Internal Service has been appointed. Mark, do you want to give some details on timings?
Yeah. Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, it is my last meeting, and spent the bulk of my career at Merthyr Tydfil, so it's a bit strange to be walking off into the sunset. But in terms of my successor, Mr. Andrew Wathen has been appointed. He'll be starting on the 17th of April. So Andrew is currently head of audit for both Newport and Monmouthshire councils, so he's got a wealth of experience. So I'm sure the service will be in, and Merthyr will be in safe hands going forward, with people like Lisa and Helen as well, who've looked after the committee over recent years. So yeah, so that'll be happening in April. So that's when I'll be actually finishing towards the end of April. So but no doubt keep in touch over the coming years.
Thank you, Mark. That's really helpful. And the other piece of news in terms of committee membership is that we have been running one lay member late for quite some time now, and I'm told that interviews are imminent. So hopefully by our next meeting we may have an additional lay member. I sometimes feel lonely up here. Councillor Gibbs.
Just like to wish all my wishes to Mark in the future. And do you fancy being a lay member on that?
So I'll see how things are looking then.
Thanks. That's a really good point, and I'm sure you'll be in demand as well. Absolutely. Thank you. Councillor Barry.
Yeah, I've known Mark for a long time now, and we've worked together. I've loved every minute. It's been great, Mark. I want to wish you all the best for the future, whatever you end up doing. I'm sure you've got some robust plans in place for what comes next. But good luck with it all, Mark.
That brings to an end the open session, and we are now going to move into closed session. And it says here, in order for the following to be considered in private, it is suggested that the public be excluded from the meeting on the grounds that involves the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraphs 18, 18A, and the part 4 of the Schedule 12A, section 100, brackets A, brackets 4 of the Local Government Act 1972. Do you know that act as well, Mark? No. Okay, so we now ask those people who aren't entitled to be at the closed session to leave. Oh, and we need to formally vote on the moving into exempt, and I look around the room when I see a show of hands. Thank you. Thank you, Maya. We'll pause while we do that, and then we'll resume.